Hey, Slider Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks so much for being here. Welcome to our special California failed state. So I live in San Diego right now. Used to live in Jackson, Tennessee, outside Memphis, West Tennessee. When I had my radio show over there, we would always look to California. And we'd always talk about stories out of California because California was and is a crystal ball of craziness. Whatever ideas were percolating out of California, rest assured in the next few years, they would be nationwide and be coming even to a red state near you. So we'd always be on the lookout with what's happening in California, the crystal ball for our country. And not only that, but we're increasingly, as Americans, being run by people from California. And not even people from California, but people from San Francisco. I mean, especially Kamala Harris, being one of many, which we'll get to coming up a little later. We have three guests today. First, we're going to talk about, with Chuck DeVore, we're going to talk about the demographic changes that have happened in California over the last 50 plus years, and then what's happening today. This is worth noting, especially if you're in Texas. From 1952 until Clinton in 1992, California voted red. For every presidential election, we voted for the Republican candidate, exception 1964 for LBJ, that's it. California used to be a red state. We'll talk later about our governors that we've elected, Ronald Reagan being one prominent one, but we used to be a red state. Make note of that, Texas. Did you see the other day the governor of Texas announced that Hewlett-Packard is moving their headquarters from Palo Alto to Houston, and he's celebrating this. And I'm thinking, hold on, Abbott, like, be careful. You're playing with fire here. You are importing not only California liberalism, but San Francisco liberalism into your state. I don't know if this is always something to celebrate. So we'll talk about demographic changes in California. Then we're going to talk about the culture of California. Not only the culture of California, but how this influences the rest of the country. A couple years back, I was in a career crossroads and figuring out if I wanted to leave the state. And I was talking to a pastor friend of mine who has a big church here in San Diego. He's super influential across the country. You know him. You've heard of this pastor before. And I was talking to him, just getting his advice and asking if I should move out of California or whatever. And he advised me not to. As crazy as it is here in California, he said the news in this country travels from the East Coast to the West Coast, right? News starts in New York and DC and travels west. Actually, living here in California, we don't even watch New York news. Like, it's like a different planet. It's a weird thing. We talk about that another day. But anyway, news travels from east to west, but culture travels from west to east. And he cited a lot of church leaders over the decades who have moved their churches out of California, big, booming, growing churches with big ministries across the country and the world, and then they moved to Texas or wherever else, and their cultural influence decreased pretty much overnight. I don't know why that is. I don't know how much longer that will be the case, but California is the culture center of the country, and that's a bad thing, right? It's a bad thing. This is no longer a state of traditional values that it used to be. There's no culture makers in Hollywood asking, will this play in Peoria? I mean, that used to be the old question. Yes, we'd make movies here in California, but they would always ask, will it play in Peoria? Meaning, will middle America accept this? Does this make sense to the rest of the country? They're not asking that question anymore. They don't care about Peoria. It's two things. Is this movie we're making, is it woke enough for San Francisco progressives, right? And is China gonna like it, right? Peoria, like, what's Peoria to these people in Hollywood? It's, will San Francisco progressives sign off on it? Will the Academy sign off on it? Does it have enough transgender characters? And what, right? And will they buy tickets in China? Because that's really where they make the money now. And then they push it out to the masses. So we'll talk about the cultural changes that have happened in California and how it's affecting the country. And our third guest, we're going to talk about the most egregious examples of corruption that are going on in California politics. Just in the open, just like blatant, and no one seems to care. We keep voting for these same clowns and in some cases, criminals. Let me show you my favorite California criminal story. I share the story all the time. This got no press. I'm going to tell you the story. You're going to think I'm making it up. Okay? Here's the short of this. Leland Yee, Y-E. You can Google this guy. You can find out the whole story. He was a state senator for many years. He was like, he was in San Francisco. Was he like on the school board? I think it was school board and then state assembly and then state senate. And he was running for secretary of state. He was winning, okay? He was arrested. This is 2014. He was arrested. Turns out this Democrat, this anti-gun Democrat, and we have all of his speeches speaking out against guns, he was trafficking automatic weapons and shoulder-fired rocket launchers into San Francisco with the Chinese mob run by a guy known as Shrimp Boy. His name's Raymond Shrimp Boy Chow. So he's smuggling in shoulder-fired rocket launchers from an Islamic terrorist group in the Philippines called the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, also known as MILF. I promise you, that story's real. He was going to win the secretary, he was going to be our Secretary of State. And he got arrested at the same time as the superintendent of the San Francisco School Board, who was arrested, it was like the same day, who was arrested for a murder for hire plot involving his son. It's like what in the world? This is the level of corruption that we have in California all day long. So that's what we got coming up today. I'll end my little rant here with this tweet here. This is Joe Biden. He tweeted this the other day. He said, "It's time to put away the harsh rhetoric, lower the temperature, and listen to each other again. To make progress, we must stop treating our opponents as our enemy. We're not enemies, we're Americans." And I like Jesse's response. He said, nah. I think I'll loot, burn, and call you a Nazi for 4 years. Then I'll call for calm once I get back in power. See how that sounds? And this is how it works. The system sells you this idea that when the right's in control, things are chaotic and out of control. But things are calm when the leftists have power. And Jesse said, I'm amazed how many people can't see this. They don't want unity. They want power. And part of that is getting you to submit to thinking that this is all normal. Things are calm now. Hey, whoa, what's the problem? The nation has found its chi, right? Have a kale smoothie, do a little yoga, relax, man, we've healed. And that's not how that's gonna work. No, I'm not gonna loot and burn anything down, but we're always gonna call out the lies. And far too many Californians have settled into this being a normal thing. And Californians need the rest of the country to say, no. we will not import any more of your failed state and your crazy California culture and politics into the rest of the country anymore. For too long, I think we've been tricked into thinking that it's Pelosi and McConnell who have all the power, right? It's not it. Those are just two clowns who use each other to fundraise off each other and get elected. The real power is in our culture and our election system, or our education system. And California has way too much influence over both of those things for the entire country. So we're gonna expose it and we're gonna fight against it. We're gonna do that coming up on this special California Failed State. Speaking of fraud, it is shockingly easy to forge a quitclaim deed in your name. I don't even know what a quitclaim deed is. What's a quitclaim deed? Have you ever used a quitclaim deed? They hack into your county clerk's office, which does not have the most advanced security system. Right? I guarantee, if they even have a security system, I guarantee it's like 2003 software. Right? So they hack in, and then they get your title, and then they forge your signature. They just trace it, and then they start taking out loans against your home until all your equity's gone. And you have no idea this is happening because they think it's you. The county thinks it's you, and no one's watching your home title for you. The bank's not. The other identity theft programs are not. It's only Home Title Lock. And only Home Title Lock is going to give you up to $250,000 to pay for legal fees so you can restore your home title because they think someone took it. It's a fraud case now. Go to HometitleLock.com, use the code RADIO. You get 30 days free protection, and you can register your address and see if you're already a victim. So code RADIO, HometitleLock.com. Hey, Snyder Crusaders, welcome back to our special. As we talked about in the first segment, news travels from East Coast to West Coast, but pop culture travels from West Coast to East Coast. It starts in California, unfortunately. This is why it's important. When I lived in Tennessee, we would always look at what's happening in California to know what's coming to the rest of the country. To get some insight into when this happened, when did we become a near lost cause? Chuck DeVore is here. Right now, he's the VP of the Texas Public Policy Foundation, but he used to be a California Assemblyman from 2004 to 2010. Also is at the Claremont Institute, former Lieutenant Colonel. Chuck, how are you, brother?
I'm doing great. Good to be with you.
Good to talk to you. Let's go back as far back as you'd like, because California used to be a red state. Like, we would vote red in many presidential elections. Now, of course, Reagan and Nixon were from California, so there's that there too. But what happened? Where do you start as like the pivot point for California going crazy?
Well, I think two key events happened. First of all, the Cold War ended, and thankfully the West won, due in no large part to President Reagan and his policies. And when the aerospace industry consolidated, and I worked in aerospace for the 13 years before I was elected in 2004, what you found was all of the manufacturing left the state pretty quickly as the companies consolidated and cut costs. And they left because of the high real estate costs, the high labor costs, the heavy regulatory burden, the high energy costs. You know the drill, right? So when that happened, you lost about 400 to 500,000 highly skilled tradespeople. Many of them were classic Reagan Democrats. They were union members, but they voted conservatively on national security grounds. They voted for Reagan. They voted for former Governor and U.S. Senator Pete Wilson, and they left the state. Then I think the other thing that happened was perhaps one of the biggest strategic errors of the Reagan presidency. You had the 1986 or 87 amnesty. A lot of people came into the country on fraud. You know, they they made up documents to be able to participate. And kind of concurrent with that, you saw a surge of illegal immigration that began into the country in the late 70s, early 80s as the economy started to improve. And what happened in California then is you had very significant demographic shifts that occurred, I think, because of these two events. And the state just inevitably began to drift to the left. And of course, that was reinforced by the fact that in America today, and less so in California, we don't do a very good job of assimilation, of, basically welcoming newcomers and explaining to them, here's what America's all about, and glad you're here, but here's kind of our history and our culture. And so as a result, I think in California, you had increasing balkanization of the electorate, where a lot of people were susceptible to appeals to kind of a tribalism as far as political appeals to specific groups rather than to a philosophy or to an economic message. Mm-hmm. And so that's pretty much continued unabated. And I think today you're looking at a potential inflection point where one-party rule has so messed up California that I think a lot of people are beginning to rethink, is this really working out for them and for their families? And so if California does turn around, it's likely going to be because of these new immigrant groups that have moved to California. So, for example, look at the Asian American community, which is, of course, very diverse. Look at Hispanics. They may not necessarily be happy with the current trajectory of California. And therein is the hope for California's turnaround.
Wow. That's okay. Let's talk about a potential for turnaround, because I am not hopeful. So I could use some hope from you. I see little glimmers of hope. Like, there was a proposition in California that would have legalized affirmative action and discrimination here in the state, and it was voted down. So that was a big surprise, mostly by Asians, as you mentioned. So but then still, we vote for Newsom, and in San Diego, we now have an all-Democrat city council. We used to be a little bastion of conservatism down here. So I see these little glimmers of hope, but still I see way more doubling down. So I don't know. What do you think in the next 10, 20 years for the state?
Well, something that can't go on forever won't go on forever. And so if you have policies that, for example, make it more and more difficult to provide reliable electricity and that lead to frequent blackouts like we see in countries that once used to have a higher standard of living and are now approaching third world status, like, for example, Venezuela, people aren't going to accept that. Certainly the wealthy on the coast, they can afford to have backup diesel generators or, backup solar power with a Tesla Powerwall or something. But the vast majority of Californians don't have that luxury. Similarly with taxes, as taxes and the regulatory burden gets higher, more and more jobs are going to leave the state. And eventually things just won't be sustainable. So I don't think it can go on forever. One of the big advantages that California has had is kind of this goodwill factor. In other words, you go around the world and San Francisco and the Golden Gate Bridge are one of the top tourist attractions in the country. So along the Pacific Rim, while California isn't certainly very competitive versus the other 49 states, it still is competitive versus, for example, South Korea or Japan or Taiwan or mainland China or India when it comes to things like rule of law, when it comes to things like, property rights, even taxes and regulation or lack of corruption. So relative to the U.S. states, it's not particularly competitive, but relative to the rest of the world, it still isn't that bad of a place. And so what's been happening over the last 15 or 20 years is California has been losing people to other states through net domestic outmigration very consistently, year after year after year. Typically, it loses between 70 to 100,000 people net to other states, mostly to Texas, by the way, every year. And then it has backfilled that loss with international arrivals. Now, last year, or I think this year for the first time, I'm trying to remember the data. I think there was some estimates for the latter half of 2019, and it seemed like the data was continuing into 2020. For the first time since the gold rush, California actually started to lose people on net. And that would be natural births over deaths. That would be international in-migration and domestic out-migration. So that is certainly a seminal, a key turning point, right? An inflection point in California's demographic history that for the first time ever, it's lost a net of people in the last year.
Yeah, I wonder also who these immigrants are that are coming in. Are they, as you mentioned, decades ago, people who are going to come in and make California more left, or are they people who understand what America is and will be more, at least, centrist? What do you think?
Yeah, so in recent years, you've seen an uptick in Asian immigration into California and a slight decline relatively in Hispanic immigration. I think the other thing that's really important to understand is that Hispanics that move to America from south of the border, so primarily Mexico and the Central American nations, that's not a monolith down there either. And so what's fascinating to me is if you look at Mexico, and I think it has 38 states, right? They have amazing diversity in terms of their own population. And so if you look at where people are moving to in America from Mexico, as an example, Texas has primarily benefited from a mostly middle-class migration from Mexico, people who graduated from high school, people whose families may have worked in the steel mills of Monterrey and other factories. They tend to come from the states in Mexico that have traditionally voted more for PAN, which is the rough analogy to the Republican Party in America. Whereas the immigrants into California, and this is primarily a phenomena that's happened since the 1970s, whereas the Texas migratory patterns are much more long established, going back to the Texas War for Independence in the 1830s, right? But the California migrants tend to come from the more poor states in Mexico, states that have traditionally voted for PRI or for the socialist President AMLO. And so you have these immigrants that really come into America with fundamentally different attitudes about government, as well as fundamentally different levels of education and capital. And I think that's something that is not particularly well appreciated by most American analysts. In fact, in this last election, while these people aren't entirely the same because they have roots in Texas that go back, hundreds of years, you had 7 counties that are Hispanic majority counties that Trump won in 2020, but that Clinton won in 2016. And so this potentially begins to show a way for California, again, with the understanding that these communities are not monolithic. But
I love that analysis. That's such a great Thomas Sowell-esque looking down at the individual cultures even of different geographic places and the difference that makes. That's really, really interesting. Wow. Okay. Last question for you, Chuck, here. The infection rate of Californians moving to other states like yours, is that overstated, or is that a real phenomenon that's a major problem? For people who don't follow me, these are progressives in California who are like, it's so crazy expensive here, and then they move to Texas and raise taxes.
Yeah, so I think, again, like the immigration out of Mexico, I think we're seeing a very specific sort of migration. I can't speak as authoritatively about the other states, but I can speak authoritatively about Texas. And so far, the migrants from California and other states to Texas are the conservatives. And I think a lot of that has to do with kind of a self-selection. In other words, Texas is 1,300 miles from California. Culturally, it's different. Texas is more into rodeo, not Hollywood and surfing. Oil and gas, not so much granola and solar power. And so, it's a big move to move from California to Texas. Now, there are exceptions. I'd argue certainly the greater Austin area is a tech hotspot and often probably attracts the more liberal Californians. But moving to Texas is a commitment. It's not like moving to Nevada or to Arizona, where you can hop in a car and you can go see your friends and relatives 4 to 6 hours later. And from a cultural standpoint, the West, which likes to think of itself as libertarian, but really it's libertine, it's more, anything goes, so that cultural attitude that you find in Nevada and Arizona is not so much in Texas. So we've done some polling at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. We did a poll just about 12 months ago now, looking into expats and their voting patterns in Texas. And what we found was that in the 2016 election, among 800 registered voters in Texas, that the new immigrants to Texas from other states were about 5% more likely to vote for Trump over Clinton in 2016. And so I think what we're seeing into Texas is largely a conservative migration. And this is probably borne out by our last election result a few weeks ago, where President Trump received the same percentage, 52%, as he did in the 2016 election during record turnout. We had the highest turnout in Texas since 1992, when 2 Texans were on the ballot, George H.W. Bush and H. Ross Perot. Right. So, here you have this huge turnout, and all the left and the media, I guess I repeat myself, think that if you had a huge turnout, that Biden would potentially win Texas. Yeah. And in fact, Trump got the same percentage.
Very good. All right, Chuck, we got to run. All super interesting. I really got to go, but is Texas ever going to turn blue?
Not at the current trend. I think we're in good shape.
Okay, wonderful. Chuck DeVore, follow him on Twitter, Chuck DeVore, Texas Public Policy Foundation. Thanks, Chuck. Appreciate your insight.
Thank you.
Great stuff. Superb. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. So I tried doing the day trading thing for a while. Have you ever done this? I can't do it. It's not for me. It drives me crazy. Maybe some people are made for it. I can't do it. And it's easy now. It's gold stories about gold prices. Gold up, gold down, blah, blah, blah. Don't worry about it. Okay? You're not playing the gold markets. I guess you can if you want. That's not for me, though. I'm playing the medium game in the long term. Medium, I just see more chaos coming. Don't you? Do you really see calm and peace, as we talked about in the first segment, as Joe Biden said it's now time for? No, I see unprecedented printing of trillions of dollars. I see Yellen in charge, who knows what she's up to. Trillions of dollars of spending bills. And it's just like, it's not even a thought. It's like Democrats want a $3.5 trillion bill and Republicans are like, no, let's not be crazy. 2.8 trillion. I'm like, what do we, value of the dollar goes down. I don't know the number right now. It's gone like down like 12% in the last X number of years, or like not even, maybe like last year even. And gold prices shoot up when that's the case. That's the game I'm playing. And then also I want to pass down a bunch to my kids as well, because that's pretty cool. If my dad bought $10,000 worth of gold in 1970 to give it to me, he'd give me $500,000. I could buy a mansion. Patriot Gold Group. They're the best people to buy your gold and silver from. A+, Better Business Bureau, the whole thing. 1-800-798-4260. Get gold in your hands. They deliver it to your house and you have gold in your hands. 1-800-798-4260. PatriotGoldGroup.com. Hey, Society Crusaders, welcome back to our special California Failed State. So we just talked about the demographic changes of California. I want to talk about the politics of California and really the corruption of California. Katie Grimes, you must follow Katie Grimes and you must go to the California Globe, her website, California Globe. She's like the preeminent investigative reporter in California, and awesome to talk to you, Katie. How are you today?
Good morning, Mike. I'm well, thank you.
So I'm so grateful for you, because there's not many people in Sacramento looking deeply into what's happening in Sacramento all the time. Can you let's first, like, big picture, like, can you just describe the level of corruption, the normality of corruption that exists in Sacramento on any given day?
On any given day? Well, from the top down, from the governor to every single elective office in the state, it seems anymore, we are a one-party state. Democrats run everything in the state, which is terribly unhealthy. And as you and I have discussed before, we've had criminal convictions of lawmakers. They are very, very attached to the state's labor unions, which is also problematic because it's the tail wagging the dog. Even in this current lockdown, you'll notice that the businesses that have been deemed non-essential are non-labor union businesses, small businesses, restaurant owners, gym owners, but all the labor union businesses, including the public employee unions who work for the state and the counties and the cities, they're all working. Corporate America is working just fine in California. You know, Walmart, Costco, Home Depot. So, I mean, this is how the state is run. It's truly the tail wagging the dog at this point.
Yeah. Hollywood, I saw, got exempted most recently from Newsom as well.
Yes.
Let's talk more about the one rule, right? Because it's not just, because there's a lot of states that have, actually most states, I think every state except for Minnesota has single party in the House, in their state House and state legislature, or state House and state Senate. But it's like, it's way deeper than that even in California, right? It's like Democratic supermajorities. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Katie, it was like the last election, the Democrats had a supermajority in the House and the Senate, but like 2 or 3 senators, state senators or state senators got arrested. So they ended up losing their supermajority just because a couple of them went to jail. But It's like deep, right?
It's very deep. We did lose a couple. We had the convicted Senator Leland Yee, who was selling rocket launchers to the Philippines. We had Senator, forgetting right now his name. We had one who was convicted for perjury. We had another one who was caught in an FBI sting. So, I mean, that's kind of the history in the state capitol in California. They did win back their supermajority and then some. It's a super, super duper majority now. There's probably 10 Republicans in the entire legislature anymore.
Totally boxed out of everything, right?
Totally boxed out of everything, including they were kept out of the state house during the coronavirus because somebody tested positive. So the Senate president decided just to shoo all Republicans out of the way so they couldn't participate.
Wait, come on. What happened? So there was a Republican who got COVID?
Somebody tested positive, yeah. So she kept everybody out of the Capitol. It's just, they're using this virus, obviously, to never let a crisis go to waste.
Okay, let's go into a detail. I know you mentioned Leland Yee, and we mentioned him in the monologue as well, which is like the most insane example. But can you give us one example of corruption?
Current corruption?
Sure. Your favorite recently or going on now?
My gosh, there's so many to choose from. Actually, I think what's happening right now with some of the biggest corruption is the election fraud and the electronic vote rigging in the state. And unfortunately, it's being protected probably by one of the biggest corrupt politicians in the state, the Secretary of State, who was actually elected to office courtesy of voter fraud in Los Angeles County. So that's a huge problem. We have the fox guarding the hen house. As for other election fraud, there was just some LA City Council guy who was convicted in another FBI sting. The problem is they're not convicted very often. We know what they're doing. We know who they're attached to, but it's very hard to nail these down.
Give me some insight into Kamala's time here in California and her problems.
Yeah, Kamala is, nobody really knows who Kamala is because Kamala is who she needs to be on any given day. Whether she was district attorney in San Francisco, she looked the other way on some brutal gangland murders, drug crimes. Then when she became attorney general, she talked tough, but she completely ignored even terrorism in the state. Remember the San Bernardino County Health murders in that case? She just kind of looked the other way. So Kamala is a disaster waiting to happen. She's about as deep as Joe Biden is.
Yeah, and then the way she went after or supported Planned Parenthood and going after the sting. That's the most corrupt. Go ahead.
Yeah, she went after the investigative reporters. And unfortunately, that kind of epitomizes what California is. They go after anybody who tries to expose what they're doing.
It's so odd, and I know you've been following this for a long time. California used to be, and we talked about this with Chuck a bit, a red state, right? It used to be a conservative state. What happened politically? I mean, we've talked about what happened culturally and demographically, but what happened politically that this is so deeply ingrained now?
It was very deliberate. There's a political consultant in Sacramento named Richie Ross, and he's a kingmaker. He was very attached to Willie Brown back when Willie Brown ran the legislature. And what Richie Ross and the LA Democrat machine decided to do was move into the neighborhoods and convince the Latino culture not only to vote, but to get their entire families to vote. I mean, it sounds simple and simplistic, but it's exactly what they did. And they started, promising more free stuff to people in Los Angeles and Southern California. And pretty soon, everybody and their brother, here legally or not, was voting for Democrats. And that's really how it started.
That being said, take us to San Francisco, because it's amazing how much of the state is run, and then how much of the influence that goes across the country comes out of San Francisco. I mean, Pelosi, Kamala, Dianne Feinstein, Gavin Newsom, these are all San Francisco machine people.
Yeah, there's a huge San Francisco machine. What's interesting about it is it seems to be more tied to Chinese, which kind of brings us into modern day America, doesn't it? There's a huge kind of a Chinese national machine. The politics in San Francisco are very, very well funded, and it's the control is staggering. And we also see how much influence Nancy Pelosi has over Gavin Newsom. I think one of the reasons that Gavin Newsom has been making some of the lockdown decisions he has in California is on orders from Madam Speaker.
Wow. What do you make of the hypocrisy of it all? I mean, we've talked before. You got Newsom, you got the mayor of London going to the French Laundry, you got the mayor of San Jose saying you can't go out for Thanksgiving, but he went with his. But it's all these leaders, all the LA mayor's out of control with all this lockdown stuff as well. What about this hypocrisy? Because it's more than hypocrisy.
It is. It's far more than hypocrisy. What I've been telling people is that obviously Governor Gavin Newsom, Mayor London Breed, Eric Garcetti, all these characters in California who've been helping themselves to, fancy restaurants and parties and gyms and getting their hair done, they obviously don't fear contracting coronavirus, do they? Otherwise, they wouldn't be going out and rubbing all of our faces in it. So I think it tells the California public there's nothing to fear. We shouldn't be locked down because these hypocrites can go out. Why can't we open our businesses and go back to the gym and have a restaurant meal?
Yep. They don't not only don't worry about getting it, they clearly don't worry about spreading it either, because that's the whole premise, right? They don't want to kill grandma, and they don't seem to care about that. Can you speak to the division in this state that exists, just like it does every state, city versus country, right? If you look at the county maps, it's just like everywhere else, right? It's red almost everywhere except for LA and now San Diego, unfortunately, and San Francisco. But that division's getting deeper and deeper.
It is. And this kind of goes back to what I was explaining before, why Richie Ross and the Democrat machine in the state decided to go deep into these big cities and get more voters. It's also where most of the fraud is perpetrated. So, we're run by Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Diego, and Sacramento. And everything else in the state is pretty much red. And it's a huge division. I think it's one of the reasons that we've had attempts to either make our legislature part-time or grow it so that there was actual representation, throughout the state, and not each of our senators represents 1 million people. So you can tell there's very little representation there. But it is working.
I'll tell you for everyone. So I used to live in Tennessee, and so I'm in San Diego now, and you go East County, San Diego, 10 minutes from where I live, and you might as well be in Tennessee. You might as well be in middle Tennessee, just as red can get, but there's just not enough people there. What's your suggestion for, you sort of mentioned just like reform. First of all, is there any chance that California can be uncorrupted? Like, can the politics here be uncorrupted? And what reforms do you think would need to happen in order for that to possibly happen?
I do think California can be uncorrupted, and I do believe it could be red again. I used to be a little more optimistic about how to do that. At this point, I think a great start would be to recall the governor, recall Gavin Newsom, and that campaign is really picking up a lot of steam, particularly the longer people are locked down. I think we're getting a lot of crossover voters and signatures on that effort, but that's just one man. I think a recall could help, but unfortunately, we are so deep, not just in debt, but so deep into the corruption, it's almost as if the state needs to burn down and start all over again. It's not impossible. We have some good lawmakers, but just not enough. And I think, unfortunately, Californians have allowed themselves to become kind of fat and complacent when it comes to voting. And they just pretty much either do what they're told, or there's a small handful out there that actually care, but it's not enough.
I think that's right. I think it needs a collapse. I don't know if it's a financial collapse or what, or all the power to go off. I mean, we live in a ridiculous third world state where our power just gets turned off. It's windy today, and they're turning power off. It's like, what are we talking about here? So people need to understand that.
I'm a native, and I remember that this never used to happen.
Of course not. And it's a shame because we're exporting all of this to the rest of the country. And that's not good. Katie Grimes, go to CaliforniaGlobe.com to get all the latest about California, because you can't trust the LA Times or anyone to do all that stuff. Katie, awesome to talk to you.
Thank you, Mike.
Appreciate you. Coming up next, we'll talk with John Phillips, KABC up in LA, and we'll talk about the cultural changes that have happened in California and talk about exporting. I mean, that's the cultural capital of the country, unfortunately. We'll talk about that next. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, welcome back to our special California, the failed state. I want to go to another resident of this crazy state, John Phillips. He's the host of KABC, which is one of the giant radio stations in Los Angeles, and also a writer for the Orange County Register. John, how are you, brother?
Thanks for having me. Great.
Good to talk to you. So California's always been, since the very, very beginning, it's always been an idea. And it's been, for a long time, a wonderful idea. What is it now? Like, how should the rest of the country view California and this concept of California?
Well, we've changed over time. I mean, California used to be the place where beautiful people from all over the world came to make it big in Hollywood, and ugly people came to take 10%. And then you also had people who were brought in for World War II in the military. We had all these military bases here. And we had this economy that was built on the military and the aerospace industry. And after the Cold War ended, those jobs went away. And we were essentially left with Hollywood, the service industry, the people taking their vacations here, and then Silicon Valley really became the dominant industry for the state. You look at state coffers, and the budget really depends on how good of a year Silicon Valley had. And there are liberal industries and there are conservative industries. My family were cattle ranchers and steakhouse owners. That is a Republican industry. California still is a big agricultural state, but not the way it used to be. When you have industries like big tech dominate the state, you have an industry that, while people think is libertarian, it's not. It's about as close to socialism as you can get, where these companies provide transportation, childcare, food, yoga classes, everything that you can possibly think of for its employees. And they look at the state and they go, well, why can't you do that for everyone else? And they dominate the dollars that are donated to Sacramento. They dominate the people who vote. I mean, you look at politicians in California, the top ones, they all come from San Francisco. San Francisco is the size of a postage stamp. Yet our governor is from San Francisco, both U.S. senators from San Francisco, Nancy Pelosi. They dominate the entire state, and it's because of Silicon Valley.
Wow, that's so interesting. And Chuck DeVore earlier talked about the aerospace industry as well, leaving right after the Cold War. Said the exact same thing. I've never heard that before.
Yeah.
Gosh, that's something. Wow. So what do you... Go ahead.
All the dads of all the people I went to school with, a lot of these guys were blue-collar guys who didn't have college degrees, who worked putting these planes together and rockets and different things for the military. And you could make a good middle-class income and own a house and have a pool and have a car, and your kids could play all the sports and have presents under the tree at Christmas. And those jobs just went away, and those people moved. They are gone. And what we're left with are people who work in other industries who have a very different idea about how the state should be run.
Wow. It just seems so unsustainable. I thought of it the other day when it came out that Hewlett-Packard was moving to Houston, and the governor of Texas was celebrating this. And my thought is, whoa, man, be careful who you're importing.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm just worried about, and clearly this has been said before, about the infection around the rest of the country. And why would you want to import people from Silicon Valley into Houston? They're not going to change, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, first of all, you're going to get Meg Whitman, and who wants that? And second of all, you're going to get all her political typeweight Marys that are going to come to Texas and pollute that state, which we've already seen some degree of evidence of. I mean, look how close Texas was in this last election. That should have been a blowout.
Yeah. Okay, so what about the culture of California? Do you have any idea of when that went so far left?
Well, it used to be, if you had a city, you wanted it to be 60% homeowners, 40% renters. That was kind of the secret sauce of what you needed to make things work. And California is now a much more densely populated state than we ever used to be. And the state has made the conscious effort to move us out of our cars, out of single family homes, and they want us to live in mixed use housing above a Panda Express. And when you pack people in together like sardines, things like whether or not your neighbor smokes impacts you. If your neighbor has a gun and they start shooting and bullets start flying through the walls, that impacts you. So you have this impulse to punish your neighbors or regulate your neighbors at every step of the way. And now you look at a city like Huntington Beach, which is, the quintessential California beach town. For the longest time, it was 60-40 homeowners to renters. Now it's 60-40 the other way. And when you have a majority of renters in a city like that, things like bonds don't matter as much. Property taxes don't matter as much. You can pick up and move whenever your lease rents out. You're not a stakeholder in that community. So things like homelessness or crime rates and taxes don't matter as much to you. And people just simply can't afford to buy homes here. So we have a middle class of renters, and when your middle class rents instead of owns, they have different priorities.
Yeah, and there's less buy-in. Wow, that's so right. Okay, let's cut to the chase. What's the end game of all this? I'm very down on California. Maybe part of that's because I'm in San Diego, which used to be a bastion of conservatism, and now It's a 9-0 city council, among other examples I could bore everyone with. But I don't see it going in a good direction, and I don't see what a turnaround could even look like. So I'm pretty hopeless, John. Where are you?
Okay, I'll give you a little bit of optimism, although I am a gambler, so take that for what it's worth. Things were pretty bad in the 90s here, where we had the crack cocaine epidemic. We had a crime wave that was totally out of control. We had riots. It was right around the same time that we had the Northridge earthquake. We had El Nino flooding us. It was a really, really, really rough time. And we had in Los Angeles a mayor who went to war with the police chief. It was Daryl Gates and Mayor Tom Bradley. And everyone thought the same thing that they think now. Oh my God, this is hopeless. We can't fix this. And politics is a pendulum where things just go back and forth. And what did deep blue Los Angeles end up doing after Tom Bradley? They elected an old, conservative, Republican businessman, Dick Reardon, who ran on the platform. Dick Reardon, tough enough to turn LA around. And he did. He was very successful. Not only elected, he was reelected in one of the most popular mayors we've ever had in Los Angeles. Pete Wilson was supposed to get crushed by Kathleen Brown in his race for governor. All the polls showed him losing by double digits. He came back with 187 and Prop 209 and 3 strikes and you're out. And he won a statewide race in California. Not just won, but he blew her out. That was a double-digit lead. And California benefited because of that. We lowered taxes. We started locking criminals up in prison. And we saw the state coffers balloon. Whereas we used to have all of these deficits, suddenly all of this money started flooding into to Sacramento. And when things like the Northridge quake happened, we had these competent business people in charge. We rebuilt our freeways after they crumbled and fell apart in short order. And we went back to work. So I think at a certain point, you are going to have pushback and you are going to have people who, are otherwise liberals stand up and say, wait a minute, what happened to all my neighborhood restaurants? What happened to my neighborhood bars? What happened to all my small businesses? And they are going to push back, and you are going to end up with another Dick Reardon or Pete Wilson.
Yeah, okay. I hope. Although, and this is too in the weeds for non-Californians, but the mayor of San Diego right now is probably going to be that Republican, and he's like the squishiest Republican. He's not Pete Wilson, Kevin Faulconer. He's no Pete Wilson. So that's a bummer if he's the future of the California Republican Party. But anyway.
But let me give you optimism on that. I think there's a chance we can all talk Rick Grenell into running.
Oh, wow.
Which would make things very interesting.
Give people the quick Rick Grenell background.
Rick Grenell is the former ambassador to Germany and the former director of national intelligence under President Trump. If you watch cable news, he is one of the most eloquent voices for right of center politics. This guy knows where all the bodies are buried. He has the ability to raise money to run a credible statewide race in California, and he does not back down.
He used to work for the mayor of San Diego like a decade or so ago, too. Yeah, he knows how to play the game. He was doing some conference call about something. I forget what it was. And the media kept asking him these other questions, and he wouldn't take their crap at all. He was fighting back on him hard, and it was really awesome to watch. What happened? Give people the background of Gray Davis, right? Because I thought of Gray Davis yesterday because I'm thinking of Gavin Newsom and his flaming hypocrisy with the French Laundry and many other things. I mean, his kids go to private school right now that meet in person. I mean, that's crazy. Like, that should be pitchforks on fire, John, right? Like, that should be enough. Well, on the other show the other day, we had a guest on talk about honor and what honor used to be in Western culture. Like, you can't be that flaming of a hypocrite and keep your job. But it's fine. Like, no one really cares. We complain about it for a day or two. But why don't we, and why isn't there just this massive push to throw bums like this out of office like we did with Gray Davis recently? Do you mind giving the history of that?
Well, Gray Davis was the governor after Pete Wilson, and he was the governor that had the electricity crisis when the lights were just going off right and left. They also raised the vehicle license fee, which is a very regressive tax. Whenever you register your automobile, it went up dramatically. And they gave driver's licenses to illegal aliens. And it was this confluence of events that led both activists and moneyed people to decide to get together for a recall. And you had both of those entities on the same page. You had Darrell Issa, who was writing big checks to fund it because he wanted to be governor. Didn't work out that way, but whatever. We all worked out. And then you had Ted Costa, who was really one of the original founders of the Tea Party in California, who was doing the grassroots angle. And you had talk radio, you had the internet, you had all of these various groups coming together, and you had a celebrity candidate. You had Arnold Schwarzenegger, who started out with almost universal name ID, an ability to raise money, who captivated the state. And when you look at all of those things and you put them together, that's really what you need to have a successful recall in California. There's certainly the anger that exists now. We haven't seen the money people come out in favor of it yet, and we need a credible candidate, which is why I think none of this works without Rick Grinnell.
Wow, Rick Grinnell. Okay, we're going to do more to make that a household name here. That's wonderful. All right, John Phillips, you're the man. Where can people get in touch with you?
They can get me at KABC Radio in Los Angeles and read my column in the Orange County Register. Follow me on Twitter at Johnny Don't Like.
Please, Johnny, how do you spell Johnny?
Johnnny.
Beautiful. Johnny Don't Like. John Phillips. Thanks, man. We'll do it again.
All right, sounds good.
That's our special California, the failed state. Oh, it is. Can it get, I know it can get bad enough. The question is, will the people of California ever step up and decide to make it good again? True story. Mike Slater, spread the word.